Alright, Untitled and Meldanine, and thank you once again for joining me. My name is Lord Aramil, joined by Lucius. Yes, Lukey here. Oh, oops. Sorry, I'm still figuring out how to do this. So what I'm doing is I'm streaming both to YouTube and to Facebook. I've got two separate laptops set up. So what you might see is I'll just kind of switch back and forth, and if that's distracting, I'm sorry, it distracts me too. But I wanted to give this a try, really, see if I could do it, see if my ADHD brain. Hello. No, he's just shy. He's an old boy. He's not mad. I'm gonna try and adjust some angles here to show off. Yes. Yes, so this is Lucius, or Lukey. Yes, he's a good old boy. He is very much an old boy. And hello, Claren. Yes, the dual computer setup will be kind of odd. I'm probably going to focus more on this one, which is going to YouTube, and therefore has a greater possibility of being watched later. But I will try my absolute best to pay attention to both chats. I have two live chats going right now, and we'll see how that goes. So this is an experiment, and we'll go from there. Yes, we will. But today, I wanted to talk about being a DM, because really, Dungeons and Dragons is more popular now than it has ever been before. Things like Critical Role, the Adventure Zone, all that good stuff have really pushed this into more of a mainstream kind of activity. It's now just a normal hobby, not some weird fringe thing. So, I mean, the mere fact that you can find this kind of stuff in normal shops is incredible. I think there's a duck having a stroke outside my window. Okay. But with that comes a whole host of interesting and new people who really need a little bit of guidance. And that's normal, that's fine. If you're a new DM, or even if you're an experienced DM and just want some additional advice, thoughts, what have you, that's what I'm here for today. So we're going to talk, we're going to pet the cat, and we're going to give a solid look at what it means to be a dungeon master. And as you can see right now, this is completely unscripted. So, let's begin. My number one piece of advice for a dungeon master is, if at all possible, be a player first. Okay? This almost seems to be, or at least I would think it would be, common sense, but apparently it is not. As I mentioned last week, it is definitely highly suggested, okay? Learn the rules, learn the basics, figure out how D&D actually plays. There's a lot you can understand by reading the player's handbook cover to cover. And that's good. I suggest it, especially for a dungeon master, but also for players as well. Read the books, alright? So, as a dungeon master, you'll want to read the player's handbook, then read the DMG, then read the player's handbook again, then read the monster manual at least once. Just kind of breeze through it. Okay, see you later. and then probably read the player's handbook again, just for good measure, right? Oh, are we? We were coming back. Okay, this is good. As the DM, you are, in many ways, shapes, and forms, the referee. So you need to be able to understand the rules. You need to understand how the rules actually function, not just on paper, not just rules as written, but also rules as they actually play out. So read the books, play the game. Okay? Here, we're up to 2 real important tips. Now, I have played in campaigns where the DM a wasn't an experienced player. Okay, we'll put it like that. And those are generally memorable. In the case that I went through last week, it was quite memorable, but it was not a great campaign. It was a very interesting campaign, but it played like a video game. And in many ways, that's just not D&D. Some things you can transfer over from your average RPG, but this is not one of them. Look at this. Lukey must be having flashbacks. He's hiding. Oh, it's okay, bud. It's okay. So, let's see here. It says that I've been live for 26 minutes over on Facebook. That cannot be right. I started this 6 minutes ago. What is this nonsense? I'll have to go back and check that out. Oh, well. Okay. Now, in addition to my own knowledge and learning, I did go on a grand quest to seek the knowledge of our elders, and have returned with great wisdom. And by all of that, I mean that while I was having breakfast this morning, my dad wandered through the dining room, and I managed to entrap him in a conversation. And for those of you who don't know, my dad was a dungeon master way back in like the 70s. So when D&D was first getting off the ground, he was there. I think he actually met Ed Greenwood. I'm pretty sure he did. I think we have a book that's autographed, which is cool. Sorry, that's completely besides the point, though. But I was able to get his take on this. So, a few things that the elders have passed down to us. Advice number 1. Have a short campaign to evaluate your players. So, what he means by this is have like a mini adventure. It doesn't have to be some grand quest, though it could, whatever. But plan for like 4 or 5 sessions, alright? And this will allow you to figure out who works well together, who works well in your games, because each dungeon master will have a different style of dungeon mastering. And it might show, like, okay, so this person does not play well with this group. And that's important, especially if you are all new. Okay. It also serves as a nice tutorial. Because, sorry, I'm getting distracted by watching myself pet Luke. Yes. It serves as a nice tutorial to teach new players how to play the game. Alright. Obvious. It seems obvious, at least. But it really is undervalued, I think. Just how much time a new player needs to really get a feel for a character. I've had over the years, I have inducted a lot of new players to D&D, and generally their first campaigns are the most difficult, just because there's a lot. There's a lot to learn. So, really, a tutorial campaign, very helpful. For that tutorial campaign, also, unless you are running with a fully experienced party, and we'll get back to that later, stick to the main 3 books, alright? Your Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and your Dungeon Master's Guide. Maybe go for a setting, but I would not suggest it, honestly. Just keep to those 3. 3. Yes. And you will have an easier time. Okay. Tip number 2 from the elders. Make use of resources. Now, in this day and age, we have a lot of options available to us online, okay? So, especially while we're all virtual and doing things on computers, one thing I have found is that just typing, let's say that you need to run a grapple, okay? Much easier in 3.5 than it was in like AD&D. Oh boy. So you just put grappling D&D 3.5 Google search. All right, and that'll come up with the SRD. Oh, man. Homebrew over everything else, dude. Okay, I have some stories about that, and we'll get back to that. Okay, Gary. All right. So, don't be afraid to look online. Okay, that's the big thing. Okay. But there's a lot of resources. We have somewhere around here Dungeons and Dragons for Dummies. It exists for at least 3.5. I assume they've updated to 5th edition. I'm not certain. But it exists. And what's more is it was helpful. It explained it simply and pretty concisely. If you are new to Dungeons and Dragons, take a look. Honestly, it's okay. Despite what the title says, it's honestly just helpful for everyone. So, make use of your resources. Next up, find out what kind of fiction your players like. Now, this one is a bit more nebulous to me. I didn't quite get it at first. But think, what, and you don't come out and say, like, what books do you read? Calm down. It's okay. But there's a lot of difference between somebody who reads a lot of mysteries versus somebody who just watches, I don't know, Marvel movies, all right? Both of these are fiction, but they have wildly different tones. Okay. Supernatural versus Lord of the Rings. Okay, both have magic. Both have, both are fictional, but they are worlds apart in the most literal sense. So figure out what your characters are expecting. Oh, okay. As you go along, and figure out what kind of adventures they really want to play in. And this is another good thing to figure out during the tutorial. So again, that short campaign, important. So, next one, of course, is figure out the level of experience of your players as well as their age. Okay. Now, the first is maybe not obvious. Luke is retreating to my closet. That's fair. That's fine. So, figure out the age of your players. Now, that's not like literal age. It's more like the maturity and the general demographic that you're playing with. So, a bunch of high schoolers will play differently than a bunch of college students, which will play differently than full-on adults out of college. So, keep these things in mind. These are important, and I have definitely seen a strong difference between playing as a high schooler, or even actually, yeah, we played back in middle school a little bit, not much, and that's a chaotic mess. So middle schoolers will play far differently than college students. All right, is basically how that half of the piece of advice goes. But also figure out the experience level of your players. If they are all very experienced, with multiple years of D&D under their belt, and maybe multiple years of playing amongst themselves. So let's say that, you've got a group of 6 friends, all right, including yourself. Yay, good job. And you all have been playing D&D together for years and years and years, and this is the first time you're going to DM. You're in a good place, okay? You already know your players, you already know that they know a lot of stuff, and I'm willing to bet that they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt, okay, when it comes to DMing. That's probably as close to ideal as you want for your first time DM. Will it be? Probably not. You want at least a couple people with some experience playing D&D, if possible. This is because those people will also help the newer players, and it means that you don't have to. Anything that you can do to limit the amount of separation of your own attention, the better. Where'd he go? He was right here a moment ago. Okay, whatever. My familiar's wandering off. Oh well. Okay, just making sure that everything is still going correctly. I wish I could fix that. Oh well. Sorry. So, figure out how experienced your players are. If no one has any experience playing D&D, then you're in for a bit of a wild ride. I'm not gonna lie. And I'm not saying it's going to be all bad, but you can't go into the game expecting it to play like a video game. There's a parody video somewhere on YouTube that I've seen where a player is trying to pull the kind of shenanigans that they could in Skyrim. And that just should not work. Okay? You can't, have your party distract the blacksmith and then you sneak around them, steal their entire stock, sneak back around, and sell it back to the shopkeeper. No, don't try to put a bucket on somebody's head and just think that you can get away with everything from now. Like that video made me cringe so hard for that poor DM, even though it's entirely fictional. You're starting at a place of reality and realism, and then adding fantasy elements, not that. Okay, sorry. So, figure out what kind of experience your players do have. You might have players who have only played in video games, role-playing games before. And that's fine. These are good. Role-playing games are fun. I've played a lot of them myself. But you have to be aware of that and be aware of the tropes and the cliches, and I'll get back to those. But I remember I had a player who, the first time he played D&D, he played a female character. And that's just because in every RPG before then, he... Hello, Obi. Yes, I can start taking off layers if you want, Obi. It's okay. So, but he would play female characters in RPGs just because he generally played from, third person perspective and just, was used to watching a female butt, running across the screen rather than a male. And he just instinctively did that again. Made like, okay, female character, here we go. And then I guess halfway or through character creation, or at least in the first, I don't know, session or two, he realized that that doesn't matter at all. So that's just that's one cliche, and it's kind of a funny story in and of itself. But you got to be aware of where your players are coming from and how you can use that to your advantage and to the betterment of the game. Okay. Let's see. Yes. The next piece of advice from our elders. Frequency, location, genre. Okay. So this ties in to what kinds of fiction the players like, at least the last point. So the genre. Are you playing a mystery? Are you playing an Indiana Jones-esque bit of, exploration? Are you playing a game of intrigue, dungeon delving, war? All sorts of genres are possible in D&D under the umbrella term of fantasy. So figure out really not only what you really want to play, but also what the players want. Because, and honestly, this might be something that you just outright ask the players. It's like, okay, I feel comfortable DMing for this kind of game, or this kind of game. And there you go. Maybe figure all of this out, like, a couple weeks at least before your first session. Okay? Frequency and location. This is kind of something that might need ironed out before. Well, it needs to be ironed out before and might be mixed and matched later in the campaign. Usually, I like to play in campaigns that play once a week, but I understand that not everyone has that kind of time, so I have played in campaigns where we play every other week. This isn't bad, but it does require a little bit of recap every other week then. Location is very easy right now. We're all stuck in our own homes, and yeah. But when we aren't in a pandemic, hopefully someday, please, you do need to figure out where you'll play. For my groups, it's pretty easy. We play at my place because we've got all the books. And we're usually a surprisingly centralized location, which is kind of nice in many regards. Yeah. Well, there's that. We're not going to get into that, Claire. Let's see here. But figure out how often and where you'll play. These are really important pieces. Let's see here. Oh, yes, a big tip, and one that I can't stress enough is it is not player character versus dungeon master. Right? It is not the players versus the DM. It is the players in a world working with the dungeon master to create an entertaining story. That's it. Okay? If it was literally player characters versus dungeon master, the campaign would be over in seconds. You literally cannot fight the dungeon master. It's like fighting a universe that is innately hostile to you. Okay, you can't. It is impossible. And as the dungeon master, you cannot look at it like that. All right? You are the storyteller, and these are the main characters of your story. All right? You might dick them over hard at times, but you should also give them their moments of triumph, their moments of funny, their moments of victory. Okay? Yes, over the winter especially, and over COVID, I have grown the elven equivalent of a beard. Uh, Thank you for noticing. It is not as impressive in real life. It is actually really patchy and sad. Oh, this is interesting though. I've got with the both on the Facebook and the YouTube, and 2 live chats. I'm really enjoying this thus far. Okay. Now, my father's advice continues with keep the magic and the level low to start. So, my dad ran a campaign for myself and my friends and my brother, and it lasted about 6 years. Okay, this is a long campaign. We we were in that dungeon for years. Holy shit. And we barely scratched the surface of it. And my character was the highest level by the end of the campaign at level 7. Yeah. In other campaigns that I've played, we'll play for less than a year and go from level 1 all the way up to like level 10. My dad and I have very different styles of dungeon mastery. But, sorry. The point remains is when you are a brand new DM, it is easier to DM for lower level characters, generally. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't DM for a higher level party, but it does mean that a higher level party has far more options at its disposal. It has far more in the way of variability. Okay. So, I mean, 2 level 8 fighters will be wildly different. Okay. Rather than like 2 level 1 fighters or even level 2 fighters. So you gotta keep these things in mind. It's also more difficult to figure out an appropriate challenge for higher level characters. Alright? Now, your levels 1 through 3, most things are challenging, okay? Basement full of large rats can be a challenge for a first level party. Cool. But when you're level 10, what is an appropriate challenge? Well, Is it an adult red dragon? A beholder? Like, it's very easy to accidentally trip up and give them something that isn't a challenge, or alternatively, trip up and give them something that is beyond challenging. Okay? These are important things to keep in mind, and which is why I generally like to start a campaign at a lower level and then build up to higher levels so you can continually gauge what kind of challenge is appropriate. Feeling? Personally, I like to start at level 3 usually. That gives the players enough time to, you know, plan out what they want their characters to do. But also, as a caveat to that, I'm not a brand new DM, and I'm generally not playing with brand new players. So, as a brand new DM with perhaps brand new characters, do not be afraid to start at just level 1. It's okay, it's good. Just keep in mind what kinds of players you have. If you have a mostly spell based party, one encounter a day might be all that they can handle. And that's okay. It honestly is okay. So, keep that in mind. My dad also likes to keep the magic low. And what that means is more of a Tolkien-esque level of magic. I really enjoy Eberron, where magic is fucking everywhere. Magic trains, magic airships, magic lighting on the city boardwalk. Okay, like magic is everywhere in Eberron. You can send effectively a telegram across the continent. Okay, but for your first time in D&D, that might not be appropriate. Figure that out. That really comes down to what you and your characters can and want. Can roleplay and want to roleplay. Let's go with that. So, the last piece of advice from the father is the more familiar you are with the setting, the better, but know that the players probably aren't. Okay. Excuse me. So, what that means is when you do decide to crack open one of the many campaign settings that come with D&D, we'll go with Eberron. I won't pull out the book right now, but point is that before you play an Eberron campaign, you'll want to read the campaign setting fully, as deeply as you can. Okay, maybe you'll pull in additional materials from either other books or online or whatever. Like I said, use the resources you have at your disposal. Alternatively, if you're doing a homebrew campaign, like Reed mentioned, then you're going to definitely know it better than your players just by the sheer fact that you made it. You have created this world. Remember that you are everyone and everything that is not the player characters. Okay? Everything from the most noble empress in her silk-lined courtroom all the way down to the smallest goblin that enjoys making graffiti with its own dung. Like, you are all of these things, and you have to know the setting to know where one is appropriate. Okay, but the point is that the players have no clue, more often than not. All right. And you have to be aware of that and have to accept that and be able to deal with that. is what it all really boils down to. It can help to have a player who knows the setting. Uh, I've done my best to help Roz during his Eberron campaign setting because I know Eberron very well, and I've done my best not to metagame it. I've done that a little bit, and it's kind of bad, but I made up for that by dumping a huge number of skill points into knowledge skills. So like, oh yeah, I totally know all sorts of things, and I can just info dump, and Roz can act like he already knew them, or he probably already knows them because he's a smart guy. He he knows Eberron pretty well too, so I'm not going to discount him uh, or discredit him in any way because he did a great job, and I'm really enjoying his campaign and all that good stuff. Um, disclaimer. But if you have a player who really knows their setting, and you plan on wildly changing the setting, talk to that player first, please. Okay, please. Oh, um, what's this? Yeah, if your group is good, they won't rush you. Yeah, that's true. Now, but to get to this point, and I mentioned this a bit last week too, but I played in a homebrew campaign where we were ostensibly set in Eberron, and it was a bit of a nightmare, really. The DM was brand new, and honestly, telling this story last week was what really gave me the idea to do this video here. I don't want to discredit new DMs, obviously. That's not the purpose of this video. But if you're going to be a brand new DM, there are a few things that you should not do. Giving a blanket statement that the players can play anything they want, whether it's from a book or from homebrew or whatever, do not do that. Oh my god, it was such a nightmare, okay? Like, and it was, and I felt terrible too by the end, because here I am, playing a Warforged Sword Sage from the Tome of Battle, because uh, that book has basically been banned in most campaigns that I've played in, mainly because it's completely broken. Uh, but also just Rin played a magical girl. She was able to fly, shot beams of energy like a warlock, and was able to heal unlimited times a day, like just cure light wounds forever, and that was a mess. Similar things all across the board, except that only about half of like you could cleanly split the party in half. I think there were like 7 of us too. There's a tip in and of itself. 4 to 6 is the maximum. All right, that is the perfect number of players. Is somewhere between 4 and 6. Do not go above 6, and you might not even want to get to 6. Okay, 5 is probably the perfect number of players. Okay, uh, but there were like at least 7 of us, so the party is too big to start. And I think three, maybe 4. I want to say 3 people in that group were very new to D&D. Like I think one of them had played in a campaign or two, and then 2 were brand new. All right, and then there was a DM who was also brand new and had played like a single session or 2 of D&D, which is such a red flag that. Hmm. And we were what? Early college age, late high school, somewhere in there. So these are not the most mature of players to start out with. So perhaps you will forgive us, us experienced people, when we heard that nothing was off the table, and we all just kind of looked up, and as John Mulaney once said, we all rose independently, but as one said, "Okay, let's go wreck the place." So the four of us who are experienced were ready to just unleash hell upon this campaign setting. And the other three were just completely unprepared for anything. The characters themselves were less than optimized, and just, I mean, they were first time characters. Honestly, that's what it boils down to. Is just the first time you play D&D, you're not going to make a super amazing character. It's okay. It's a learning experience. It's a learning curve. You figure out what works well, and what works well in a specific campaign. All right. Some things just do not make sense in proper in certain campaigns. I should say. Like, a ranger is just bad. But a ranger in a dungeon crawl, that's worse. Okay. A druid in an intrigue campaign, kind of weird. I'm not gonna say it won't potentially work out, but it won't be great. Or at least you need to really, you know, thread the needle, as it were. So, I don't remember what all the new players played. I think Rickett was part of it and played a ninja, which made one of the new players, I think they played a rogue, and she was just superfluous by the end. That's the other thing. Also about too many players is that there's going to be so much overlap that at least one player will feel underutilized at best, if not outright just unhelpful. And you do not want that. You do not want that feeling. And we get enough of that feeling in real life. Let's not bring it into D&D. So, 4 or 5 people, everybody has a role and a purpose. And you might have a generalist who can step in as need be. Now, let's see. I think one of the newer players was a rogue and one was a ranger, which is just a bad idea to start with anyways, because rangers are painfully underpowered in D&D, from what I understand, just throughout everything. So it was not what I would have suggested for a first-time player at all. There are probably good ways of playing a ranger. I'm not going to discount it completely, but you have to know exactly what you're doing. And when you've got ninjas and magical girls and sword sages and whatever else were running about, it was rough. It was rough for those players. And like I said, by the end of the campaign, I just felt bad. Not for the DM who had brought this upon himself so much, but more for the other players who were obviously not having much fun. And by the end, I don't think anyone was having fun. So, to recap, we started in Eberron. Okay, so the first 10 minutes of the campaign are in Eberron. All right, we get a job from the local noble, whatever. His son's been kidnapped. We have to go into a tower and grab him, get him back. Uh, First, you know where he is? Like, that's odd, but okay, whatever. He tried to give us like a bunch of bracers that would make like I'm trying to remember exactly how it was because it was the most fuckety mechanic that I've ever encountered. Um, like we all got bracers, matching bracers for whatever reason. That every time we rolled a natural 20, it produced like a marble, and I forget what the marbles did, but you could use them for something, and it was just a really weird mechanic. And I remember a lot of the experienced players were just like, "What the fuck is this?" um, so sorry, that was just a little bit of an awkward aside. Um, Anyways, so we go to the tower. We get into the tower. The door slams shut behind us. Okay, whatever. And then we are ripped out of Eberron and into some strange hellscape. We cannot leave the tower, is what it basically boils down to. That's bad. That's that's just bad writing. I don't think anybody tried to eat the marble, but I wouldn't put it past some of us. Luckily, I mean, I was a warforged. I didn't care. I didn't have to eat or sleep or even really breathe, so it didn't bother me. But I feel like logistics should have been a bigger issue than they were. Uh, but like I mentioned last week, every level of this tower was like what 5 or 6 rooms, and in these rooms there were exactly one encounter with just random treasure. It was like walking through a random encounter table, and it was incredibly boring, especially by the end. It's just you burst in the door, you fight the monster, you take their treasure. It was like somebody took Dungeons and Dragons and reduced every nuance and bit of fun down to a flow chart. Okay. It was so incredibly boring. Um, every level of the tower, every time you went up a level in the tower, you went up a level as a character, um, which is so incredibly poor of a choice for a dungeon master that I cannot fathom. And we did this for what, a couple months? I don't remember. I'll be honest. It's all just a blur. It feels like, especially now. Um, so by the end, I'm like level 7 or 8, sword stage, just swinging through. Add all the new players. I think there were times near the end where at least one of the new players just stopped showing up because they felt that superfluous, and that's when I think the more experienced players really realized, like, oh, now we feel bad because we didn't try to uh what's a good term? We weren't trying to make the new players superfluous. We weren't trying to. We did our best to include them because we've all been new. It's just how it is. But that was a very rough campaign, and I wouldn't wish that as a first campaign on anyone. So, especially now that I have matured far more than we were back then. it was rough. Oh. Anyways, that's perhaps a very sobering and grim note. So I'll try to move on beyond that. Dr. Pepper. Tears. Another tip to move past that debacle. Okay. When in doubt, remember that cliches exist for a reason. Okay. So use cliches to your advantage. There are so many that I'm not even going to really get into them. If you want, there is an excellent channel on YouTube, Overly Sarcastic Productions. So they do, what is it, trope talks. Those are good. And you can use those kinds of things to your advantage all throughout. Okay, everything from accents to cultural norms, the whole 9 yards. Okay, if your characters are struggling to find something to do, maybe between adventures, maybe mention that this tavern has a quest board, or maybe not quest board because really quest board, but a postings, place where let's say like, oh well, there's a message board, and on that there is a reward set for killing a bunch of wolves. And players are like, oh, okay, yeah, we can do that, sure. Oh, some spending money is always good, sure. Don't be afraid to dangle a plot hook or two. Now, of course, you might have asshole players who dodge plot hooks like Matrix, but having been on both sides of that, those kinds of players seem to mature out of it, or they just stop playing D&D. And honestly, you don't probably want those kinds of players anyways, so no big loss. Regardless. Now, what was it? Oh yeah, and don't be afraid to subvert expectations as well. Okay, so cliches can be useful on both sides of the spectrum. So you could make a noble who talks in a bit of a Transylvanian accent. Sure, whatever. But maybe he's not a vampire. And you could have a full session of the players trying to figure out how this person is a vampire. And he's just a dude. Just a foreign dignitary, maybe. And that can be funny. That could be hilarious, actually, if your players spend a whole session. As long as they're having fun. And maybe this is the biggest tip that I can give. The goal of the game is to have fun. Okay? It doesn't matter if the entire session is wasted from a storytelling perspective. If everybody laughs hard and says, man, I can't wait for next session. I know that I have done my job as a DM when people message me outside of all of this and saying, I can't wait to play more. And I think on that note is where I'll actually end. So, thank you all for joining me. This will be up on YouTube and probably up on Facebook. And I can't wait to see you all next time. So, Hantan il Tulien Meldanin, and farewell.